Julian Reeves stood near the side entrance of the royal chamber, his posture casually alert in a way that only came from years of security work. His position gave him a clear view of the chamber's main floor, where Queen Vaelis sat on her throne discussing trade agreements with a delegation from the Sarathi collective. He'd been on the Kethran homeworld for 3 months, hired as an outside security consultant after border skirmishes with a neighboring system had raised concerns about internal threats. The job was supposed to be straightforward: review palace defensive protocols, identify vulnerabilities, make recommendations, collect payment, and move on to the next contract. The Kethrans were an imposing species, tall, powerfully built, with chitinous plating covering portions of their bodies that gave them a naturally armored appearance. Their society functioned on strict hierarchical codes and concepts of honor that Julian had spent weeks trying to fully understand through cultural briefings and observation. Queen Vaelis was younger than Julian had expected when he'd first arrived. By Kethran standards, still in what would be considered early prime, though she'd ruled for over a decade. She had a reputation for strategic brilliance and unwavering decisiveness. In the time Julian had been observing palace operations, he'd seen that reputation was well-earned. She commanded attention without effort, made decisions with confidence that seemed to brook no second-guessing, and maintained control of a complex court with efficiency that impressed even his cynical security professional's mind. The chamber was substantial, high ceilings, walls adorned with historical battle standards, seating arrangements for court observers. Today it held approximately 30 beings: the queen, her personal guard of 8 warriors positioned at strategic points, the 5-member Sarathi delegation, various advisors and attendants, and Julian himself. The atmosphere was formal but not particularly tense. Standard diplomatic business. Trade route negotiations were important but not controversial. Nothing that would typically raise security concerns beyond routine protocols. Julian had been conducting his assessment methodically, documenting everything from guard shift patterns to surveillance coverage to how palace staff moved through secured areas. He'd noticed some concerning gaps: shift changes that weren't quite synchronized, blind spots in monitoring systems, moments where protocol got relaxed because nothing ever happens during routine diplomatic meetings. He'd been planning to present his findings to the Queen's Security Council next week. A comprehensive report detailing vulnerabilities and recommended improvements. Professional work that would earn him a solid reputation and good references for future contracts. He was mentally reviewing a section about entrance protocols when movement caught his peripheral attention. One of the Queen's advisors, a Kethran named Kethran, whose background Julian had personally reviewed during his security assessment, was reaching beneath his ceremonial robes. The motion was just slightly wrong. Too quick, too purposeful, and the angle suggested he was drawing something that shouldn't be there. Julian's body reacted before his conscious mind finished processing the threat. Years of training, of real-world security situations, of drills and scenarios and actual attacks, had created automatic responses that bypassed rational thought when speed mattered more than analysis. Kethran drew a weapon, compact plasma pistol, clearly designed to bypass standard security screening. The barrel swung toward Queen Vaelis, who was still focused on the Sarathi delegation, completely unaware of the betrayal unfolding from someone she trusted. Julian moved. 3 strides crossed the distance between his position and the Queen. His body interposed itself between her and Kethran's weapon with timing born of instinct rather than calculation. Kethran fired. The plasma bolt hit Julian's center mass. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Searing pain exploded through his chest cavity, white-hot agony that short-circuited coherent thought and turned his entire awareness into pure sensation. The force spun him sideways, momentum carrying him to the floor in a graceless collapse that drove what little breath remained from his lungs. His vision grayed at the edges immediately. Pain like nothing he'd experienced before, and he'd been shot before, stabbed once, subjected to training scenarios designed to simulate extreme injury. This was worse. The plasma burn was cooking tissue, destroying cells faster than his body could process damage signals. Somewhere beyond the pain, chaos erupted. Shouting in Kethran guards reacting, weapons being drawn, orders being barked in tones that cut through the confusion. The diplomatic delegation was scattering, attendants screaming, someone bellowing commands that Julian's fading translator implant couldn't process properly. Through dimming vision, Julian saw Queen Vaelis stand from her throne. She should be taking cover, should be letting her guards establish a protective perimeter, should be doing literally anything except what she actually did. She walked directly toward him. Through the chaos, through armed guards converging on Kethran, through the pandemonium of an assassination attempt in the royal chamber. She walked toward the human bleeding on her floor with absolute purpose and zero regard for her own continued safety. Julian tried to speak, managed only a weak sound that was more exhalation than word. His body was shutting down, priorities shifting to survival rather than communication. Queen Vaelis knelt beside him, not a crouch to check his injuries, not bending down while maintaining defensive readiness. She dropped to both knees, her robes pooling in his blood, her hands pressing against his wound with surprising gentleness despite the Kethran strength that could easily crush human bone. And she spoke, one phrase in formal Kethran that cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Verath kesh'val, moreth vas'tin, Julian's translator implant, somehow still functioning despite his deteriorating condition, rendered it. Blood debt acknowledged, life bond claimed. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Every guard in the chamber froze mid-motion. Not hesitating, stopping completely, as if the Queen's words carried physical force that halted momentum itself. Kethran, being restrained by 2 guards with weapons pressed against his carapace, went completely still. His expression shifted from defiant fury to what looked like absolute horror. The entire chamber fell silent, except for Julian's labored breathing and the quiet sounds of the Queen's hands working against his wound. Every Kethran present was staring at their queen, with expressions Julian's fading consciousness couldn't properly interpret, but which clearly indicated something extraordinary had just occurred. Queen Vaelis had knelt in a human's blood, had claimed something called life bond, had invoked words that apparently meant everything to the species surrounding them and which Julian didn't understand at all. His vision was failing now, darkness creeping in from the edges despite his attempts to remain conscious. The pain was fading too, probably a bad sign, suggesting his body was giving up on processing stimulus in favor of just shutting down entirely. The last thing he saw before consciousness failed was Queen Vaelis's face above him, her amber eyes fixed on his with an intensity that cut through even his dying awareness, her hands red with his blood, her posture protective and absolute. Then darkness took him, and Julian knew nothing more. Awareness returned in fragments. Pain first, deep, throbbing ache in his chest that suggested serious injury being actively treated. Not the searing agony of the initial impact, but the profound discomfort of damaged tissue healing under medical intervention. Sound next, soft humming of medical equipment, quiet conversation in Kethran too low for his translator to process properly, the gentle atmospheric systems of what was clearly a sophisticated medical facility. Then light, filtered through closed eyelids, suggesting illumination designed for healing rather than harsh examination. Julian tried to move and found his body surprisingly responsive. Whatever treatment he'd received had been effective. He felt weak, exhausted, but functional in ways he definitely hadn't been when consciousness had failed. He opened his eyes. The medical facility was clearly royal, everything pristine, equipment more advanced than standard palace medical wings, attention to detail that suggested this space was reserved for treating the highest status individuals. And sitting in a chair beside his bed, still wearing blood-stained robes, was Queen Vaelis. She noticed his awareness immediately, her amber eyes focusing on him with that same intensity he remembered from the chamber. "You wake." Her standard was accented but perfectly clear. The medics estimated another hour before consciousness returned. "You continue to surprise." Julian's throat was dry when he tried to speak. A medical attendant, Kethran, wearing the insignia of Royal Medical Corps, immediately appeared with water, helping him drink before retreating to a respectful distance. "You stayed," Julian managed, his voice rough. "I declared life bond. The declaration requires my presence until you wake, to ensure the bond is fully recognized and witnessed." Queen Vaelis spoke matter-of-factly, as if sitting vigil over a wounded human for hours was routine. You have been unconscious for 6 hours. The plasma bolt caused significant damage to your chest cavity, but our medical technology has repaired the worst of it. You will survive, though full recovery requires time. Julian processed this, his mind still foggy but functioning. The attempt, Kethran did he. The assassination attempt was contained. Kethran and 3 other conspirators are in custody. Your instinctive action exposed a plot that had been developing for months. Her expression shifted to something that might have been approval. You saved my life, Julian Reeves. I just reacted, saw the weapon, moved. The memory was strange. He remembered deciding to move and then being on the floor in agony, with no real recollection of the actual motion between. Didn't really think about it. Of course you didn't. That is what makes it verath kesh'val, blood debt of the highest order. True courage requires no thought, only action. Queen Vaelis leaned forward slightly. Do you understand what happened after you fell? What I declared. You said something. Blood debt, life bond. Julian's translator had captured the words but not the context, and everyone stopped. The guards, Kethran, everyone just froze. Because I invoked the oldest law of our people. The queen's tone was serious, her words careful. In Kethran tradition, one who freely gives their lifeblood to protect the throne creates a debt that cannot be ignored. It is considered the highest form of loyalty. Not coerced, not purchased, but offered from genuine courage or care. She paused, studying his face. When a ruler kneels in that blood and claims moreth vas'tin, life bond, they elevate that person to a position of extraordinary privilege and protection. You are now life bonded to the throne, Julian Reeves. In practical terms, you hold status just below my immediate family. Your safety is my personal responsibility. Your honor is tied directly to mine. Julian's still foggy mind tried to process this. I'm what? Bound to the throne by blood and declaration. It is an ancient custom, rarely invoked because the circumstances required are so specific. Queen Vaelis' expression was difficult to read. You could not have known this when you acted. You are human, unfamiliar with our deepest traditions. But ignorance does not negate the bond once my words were spoken and witnessed. So because I blocked the shot, because you gave your lifeblood freely to protect the throne, yes. And because I chose to acknowledge that sacrifice in the most binding way available to me. She gestured slightly toward her stained robes. I knelt in your blood. I claimed you before my court. The bond is sealed and cannot be easily undone. Julian tried to sit up, found the motion more difficult than expected. The attendant moved to help, but Queen Vaelis raised a hand, stopping them, then assisted Julian herself. Hands gentle but firm, supporting his weight as he adjusted to a more upright position. What does that mean? Practically. Julian needed to understand the full scope of what had happened. It means you are under my direct protection. No one can harm you without answering to me personally. It means you have authority to speak in my name on certain matters, though we will discuss the boundaries of that authority. It means your counsel will be valued, your presence required at significant events, your status elevated within court structure. She paused again, her amber eyes holding his. It also means you cannot easily leave. The life bond is not imprisonment, but it creates obligations that bind us both. You are tied to the throne, and the throne is tied to your continued well-being. The weight of it settled over Julian like a physical thing. I was supposed to be a consultant, review security, file a report, move on. You were a consultant. Now you are moreth vas'tin, life-bonded protector of the throne. Your role has changed irrevocably. Queen Vaelis stood, finally showing signs of fatigue despite her controlled posture. I did not choose this lightly, Julian Reeves. I could have acknowledged your courage without invoking the bond. But what you did, stepping into certain death without calculation or expectation of reward, that deserves recognition at the highest level our culture can offer. Even though I didn't know what I was invoking. Especially because you didn't know, that proves the gesture was genuine rather than calculated. Her expression softened slightly. Rest now, heal. Tomorrow, we will discuss what your new position entails, and how to navigate the considerable political complexity your courage has created. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it is worth, thank you, for your life, for your instinct, for standing between death and the throne when you had no obligation to do so. Then she was gone, leaving Julian in the medical bay with the quiet humming of equipment and the weight of understanding that his life had just changed in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. The attendant approached cautiously. "Is there anything you require?" "Understanding, mostly," Julian said, exhaustion pulling at him despite his attempts to stay alert. "What exactly just happened to me?" The attendant's expression suggested sympathy. "You committed an act of extraordinary courage. The Queen recognized it according to our most ancient laws, and now your fate is bound to hers until one of you dies." They hesitated, then added quietly, "For what it is worth, what you did in that chamber has already become legend among the court. The human who stepped into death without hesitation, who earned the Queen's kneel in his own blood. There will be songs composed. You will never be anonymous again." Julian closed his eyes, letting exhaustion win. Tomorrow would bring complications and obligations he'd never anticipated. But tonight, he allowed himself to simply rest in the knowledge that at least his instincts had been right. At least he'd saved a life. And whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he'd faced that plasma bolt. One moment at a time, with courage that required no thought to be genuine. Julian woke again to find pale light filtering through windows he hadn't noticed before, indicating either morning, or whatever passed for morning on the Kethran homeworld. His internal clock was still adjusting to the slightly longer day-night cycle. The medical bay was quieter now. The attendant from last night had been replaced by a different Kethran medical professional who nodded acknowledgement when Julian stirred, but otherwise maintained respectful distance. His chest still ached with the deep throb of healing tissue, but the pain was manageable, more discomfort than agony. He could breathe without sharp stabbing, which suggested significant improvement from the immediate aftermath of being shot. He was attempting to sit up when the door opened and Queen Vaelis entered, this time wearing clean robes, formal but not ceremonial, in deep blues that contrasted with her chitinous plating. "You look better," she observed, approaching his bed with that same controlled grace he'd noticed during their first meeting months ago. "The medics report your recovery is progressing ahead of projections. Human resilience, apparently." "Or good medical technology," Julian replied, managing to fully sit up this time without assistance. "Your facilities are impressive." "They should be. They've had 4,000 years of development." She settled into the chair beside his bed, the same one she'd occupied during her vigil. "We should discuss your new position and what it entails." "I'm still processing that I have a new position." "Understandable. You acted on instinct, and instinct rarely considers long-term implications." Queen Vaelis' tone was matter-of-fact rather than critical, but the implications exist regardless of your awareness of them. As moreth vas'tin, life-bonded to the throne, you hold specific rights and responsibilities under Kethran law. She pulled up a holographic display from a device Julian hadn't noticed, showing what appeared to be legal text in Kethran with standard translation running alongside. "First, protection. You are under my direct authority now. No one can harm you without answering to me personally, which in practical terms means anyone attempting violence against you faces the same consequences as attempting violence against me. This protection extends to your family if you have any, though the records suggest you have no living relatives." Julian nodded confirmation. "Only child, parents died years ago." "Then the protection applies only to you, which simplifies matters." The Queen scrolled through the document. "Second, authority. As life-bonded, you have the right to speak in my name on specific matters, primarily those concerning security and protection of the throne, which aligns with your existing expertise. However, this authority must be exercised carefully. The court will be watching to see if you understand the boundaries. What happens if I overstep? I correct you publicly, which would be embarrassing for us both but wouldn't break the bond. The bond itself is permanent unless formally dissolved, which requires either your death, my death, or a ritual of release that neither of us are likely to pursue. Julian absorbed this, so I'm bound to your throne for life. Or until one of us dies, yes. She said it calmly, as if discussing routine administrative matters. Third, obligations. You are required to attend certain ceremonies and court functions. Your presence is now politically significant. The human who saved the Queen's life is a symbol, and symbols must be displayed appropriately. You will also be expected to continue your security work, though now as official protector rather than outside consultant. What about payment? I was on contract. Your previous contract is void, replaced by status as life bonded. You will receive accommodation within the palace, access to royal resources, and compensation appropriate to your new rank. She glanced at him. It's actually substantially more than you were earning as consultant, if that concerns you. It doesn't. I'm more concerned about. Julian paused, organizing his thoughts. I'm concerned about having my autonomy stripped away, because I made a split-second decision to stop an assassination. Queen Vaelis was quiet for a moment, studying him with those amber eyes that seemed to see more than surface appearance. That is a fair concern, and I will be honest with you, Julian Reeves, your autonomy is constrained now. Not eliminated, but definitely limited. The life bond creates obligations that restrict what you can do and where you can go. If that feels like punishment for courage, I understand why you might resent it. Do I have any choice in accepting this? No. The bond was created the moment I knelt in your blood and spoke the words. My declaration before witnesses made it legally and culturally binding. Her expression was serious. But I can offer you understanding and flexibility within the structure. I won't demand you become someone you're not. Your value to me lies partly in the fact that you're human, that you bring outside perspective our court needs. Julian considered this. Can I leave the planet, if I wanted to? Not permanently. You can travel with appropriate security, but your primary residence must be here, close to the throne you're bonded to. She paused. Is that your intention? To leave as soon as physically possible? I don't know. I'm still processing everything. Julian met her gaze. Yesterday, I was a security consultant. Today, I'm life-bonded to an alien queen. That's a lot to absorb. It is, and I won't pretend the situation is simple or without complications. Queen Vaelis stood, the holographic display fading. But I will say this, what you did in that chamber was extraordinary. Not because it saved my life, though I'm grateful for that, but because it was genuine. You saw danger and reacted without calculation. That kind of courage is rare in any species. She moved toward the door, then paused. The court is already discussing you. Some view your elevation with approval, proof that courage is valued regardless of origin. Others view it with suspicion, a human given unprecedented access and authority. You will need to navigate those politics carefully. I'm not a politician. No, but you're intelligent and observant. You'll learn. She opened the door, then looked back one more time. There's a ceremony in 3 days, formal recognition of the life bond before the full court. You'll need to attend once the medics clear you for public appearance. We can discuss protocols before then. After she left, Julian sat in the medical bay, staring at nothing and trying to process the enormity of what had happened. He'd blocked an assassination attempt through pure instinct. He'd saved a queen he barely knew. And in doing so, he triggered ancient customs that had bound him to her throne with obligations and protections he was only beginning to understand. The attendant approached with medication and food, both designed for human biology, which suggested the palace had already adjusted its systems to accommodate his permanent presence. The queen spoke with you for some time, the attendant observed while checking his vital signs. That is significant. She does not typically spend this much personal attention on court members. I'm not really a court member. I don't know what I am anymore. You are moreth vas'tin, life-bonded protector. It is a position of great honor and great burden. The attendant's tone was sympathetic. Many would envy the status you've achieved, but I suspect you would prefer to still be the anonymous consultant who could leave when his contract expired. Yeah, that would be simpler. Simpler is not always better. The queen chose to kneel in your blood, to claim life bond before the entire court. That was not required by law. She could have acknowledged your sacrifice without invoking the bond. That she chose to do so suggests she sees value in you beyond the immediate act of courage. Julian absorbed this. Are you saying she planned this? I'm saying she made a choice in the moment, just as you did. Both of you acted on instinct informed by deeper values, and now you're both bound by the consequences of those choices. The attendant completed their checks and stepped back. Rest more. The ceremony in 3 days will be demanding, and you should be fully healed before facing the court. Alone again, Julian lay back and stared at the ceiling, his mind turning over everything that had changed in the span of a few terrible seconds. One shot, one instinctive choice to step between death and a queen he'd sworn no oath to protect. And now, his fate was bound to hers until one of them died, shaped by customs older than human spaceflight and weighted with political implications he was only beginning to comprehend. He touched his chest where the plasma bolt had struck, feeling the dull ache of healing tissue beneath the medical dressings. The wound would scar, probably badly, despite the advanced medical intervention. A permanent reminder of the moment he'd blocked death and bound himself to an alien throne through courage that required no thought to be genuine. He closed his eyes and tried to rest, knowing that in 3 days, he'd face a court full of beings who would judge whether the human was worthy of the honor their queen had granted him, and hoping that the same instinct that had saved a life would somehow guide him through whatever came next. 3 days later, Julian stood in a preparation chamber adjacent to the Great Hall, wearing formal attire that had been specifically created for him. A blend of Kethran ceremonial style adapted for human physiology. The garments were surprisingly comfortable despite their obvious expense and craftsmanship. His chest still ached, but the medics had cleared him for the ceremony. The wound was healing remarkably well, though they'd warned him he'd carry a significant scar. He'd accepted that with the same pragmatism he'd learned in security work. Scars were proof you'd survived something that could have killed you. A court official, a Kethran named Verath who'd been assigned as his cultural liaison, was reviewing protocol for the ceremony. You will enter when announced. Walk to the designated position before the throne. Queen Vaelis will speak the formal acknowledgement of life bond. You will respond with the acceptance phrase I've taught you. Verath's tone was patient but firm. Do not improvise, do not add personal remarks. The ceremony is ancient and must be performed exactly. I understand. Julian had spent the past 2 days memorizing the proper responses, working with Verath to get pronunciation correct. His translator would help, but speaking some phrases in actual Kethran was apparently important for this ceremony. The court will be watching for any sign that you're unworthy of the honor bestowed. Some already disapprove of a human being elevated to life-bonded status. Verath's expression was serious. Your performance today will shape how you're perceived going forward. No pressure then. Considerable pressure, actually. But the queen chose you for reasons beyond saving her life. She sees something valuable. Try to prove her judgment correct. The door opened, and a guard indicated it was time. Julian took a deep breath, carefully, mindful of his healing chest, and walked out into the Great Hall. The space was filled. Not just court members, but representatives from allied systems, military commanders, diplomatic envoys. Hundreds of beings, all focused on the human who'd saved their queen and been bound to her throne for it. Julian walked the designated path, his steps measured and controlled. Years of security work had taught him how to move with confidence even when nervous, and he drew on that training now. Queen Vaelis sat on her throne, wearing full ceremonial regalia that made her look even more imposing than usual. Her amber eyes tracked his approach with that same intensity he'd come to recognize. He stopped at the designated position and executed the formal bow Verath had drilled into him: specific angle, precise duration, proper hand positioning. When he straightened, the queen stood. The hall fell absolutely silent. She spoke in formal Kethran, her voice carrying across the space with clear authority. Julian Reeves, human of Earth, you gave your lifeblood to preserve the throne. You stepped into death without hesitation, without obligation, without expectation of reward. This is verath kesh'val, blood debt of the highest order. By ancient law, I declared moreth vas'tin, life bond, claiming you as protector and binding you to the throne. She paused, then continued in standard so Julian could respond. Do you accept this bond? Do you acknowledge the obligations and protections it creates? Do you swear to serve the throne with the same courage you demonstrated in that moment of crisis? Julian responded with the phrase Verath had taught him, speaking in Kethran: Kelverath moreth, vas'tin Kethran, Siveth kel courage moreth truth. His translator rendered his own words back to him. Blood debt is honored. Life bond to throne accepted. Service with courage and truth. The queen stepped down from the throne, approaching him with deliberate ceremony. When she reached him, she placed both hands on his shoulders, a gesture that apparently signified acceptance and elevation. Then before this court, before these witnesses, I declare the bond complete and binding. Julian Reeves is moreth vas'tin, protector of the throne, honored member of the royal household. Let all recognize his status and accord him the respect it demands. The court responded in perfect unison with a Kethran phrase Julian's translator rendered as, "Witnessed and recognized. The bond is sealed." Queen Vaelis removed her hands from his shoulders and spoke more quietly, though still audible to those nearby. "You may speak now, if you wish to address the court." This wasn't scripted. Verath had mentioned it was optional, but could be powerful if done well. Julian took a breath and chose his words carefully, speaking in standard since his Kethran wasn't sufficient for improvisation. "I didn't block that shot expecting honor. I didn't know about ancient customs or life bonds or any of this." He gestured slightly, indicating the ceremony and the watching court. "I just saw someone in danger and moved to stop it. That's who I am, someone who can't stand by when there's a threat I can stop." He paused, meeting the queen's eyes briefly before addressing the broader court. "I know some of you question whether a human should hold this position. I understand that concern, but I promise you this, I will serve with the same instinct that made me step in front of that plasma bolt. No calculations, no politics, just genuine effort to protect what needs protecting and do what's right." The silence that followed was different from the formal ceremony silence. This was evaluation. Hundreds of beings processing his words and deciding what they thought of the human their queen had elevated. Then someone in the court, Julian couldn't see who, began what his translator rendered as a gesture of approval. Others joined, and within seconds the entire hall was participating in what appeared to be the Kethran equivalent of applause. A rhythmic tapping of hands against whatever surface was available, creating a cascading sound that filled the space. Queen Vaelis' expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction. She turned to address the court. "The ceremony is complete. The bond is witnessed and sealed. Let us celebrate this recognition of courage and loyalty." What followed was several hours of formal reception, endless introductions to court members, military commanders, diplomatic envoys. Julian's head spun with names and titles and political positions. Verath stayed close, providing whispered context when needed and steering him away from potentially problematic conversations. Throughout it all, Julian remained aware of Queen Vaelis' presence. She circulated through the reception as expected, but her attention kept returning to him, checking his status, ensuring he wasn't overwhelmed. Finally, as the reception began winding down, she approached him directly. "You survived your first court ceremony," she observed. "Well done." "I'm exhausted." "That's normal. Court functions are demanding even for those who grew up with them." She guided him away from the main reception area toward a quieter side chamber. "We should discuss your immediate future." Once they were in relative privacy, her formal demeanor softened slightly. "You spoke well during the ceremony. Not what I expected. I thought you might stick strictly to the scripted responses. I figured honesty was better than perfect protocol. In this case, yes. The court needed to hear your genuine voice, not memorized phrases." She settled into a chair, gesturing for Julian to do the same. "Now, practical matters. Your quarters are being prepared in the residential wing near the royal section. You'll have support staff assigned. Tomorrow, you begin formal duties as life-bonded protector, which means working with my security council on ongoing threat assessment." "The assassination attempt, have you learned more about the conspiracy?" "Yes. Kethran was recruited by a faction that opposes some of my recent policy decisions regarding alliance structures. They believed removing me would allow them to influence my successor toward their preferred positions." Her expression hardened. "They were wrong. The succession is clearly established, and my sister would have been even less sympathetic to their goals." "How many were involved?" 7 total, all now in custody. Your instinctive action not only saved my life, but exposed the entire network before they could do more damage." Queen Vaelis met his eyes. "That's why the life bond was appropriate. You did more than block one shot, You prevented what could have been a destabilizing political crisis. Julian absorbed this. I'm glad I moved fast enough. As am I, she stood. Rest tonight. Tomorrow begins your actual work as moreth vas'tin. It will be demanding, but I believe you're capable. As she moved to leave, Julian spoke. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you kneel? You could have acknowledged what I did without invoking the life bond. Why choose the most binding option? Queen Vaelis was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Because what you did deserved more than token acknowledgement. Because binding you to the throne provides stability, a clear message that courage is valued, that loyalty has meaning, that I protect those who protect me. She paused. And because in that moment, seeing you bleeding from a shot meant for me, I felt something that demanded recognition at the highest level our culture can offer. What did you feel? Gratitude, respect. And she hesitated, then continued. Connection. You risked your life for someone you barely knew because it was right. That kind of character is rare. I wanted to bind you to the throne before you could disappear back into anonymous security consulting. Julian didn't quite know how to respond to that. So I'm here permanently. Unless you die or I die or we both agree to ritual release, yes. She met his eyes. I won't pretend that's fair. You didn't choose this. But I hope, over time, you'll find value in the position beyond the obligations. After she left, Julian sat alone in the chamber, processing everything that had happened since that terrible moment in the royal chamber 3 days ago. One shot, one instinctive decision. And now his entire life had been reshaped by customs older than human spaceflight and weighted with implications he was still learning to understand. He touched his chest, feeling the dull ache of the healing wound beneath his formal attire. The scar would be permanent, visible proof of the moment he'd stepped between death and a queen. But the real scar, he suspected, was the one left by having his autonomy constrained, his future bound to an alien throne, his life permanently tied to someone he'd saved through pure instinct. Was it worth it? He didn't know yet. But he'd made the choice to move, and she'd made the choice to kneel, and now they were both living with the consequences. And maybe, those consequences would eventually feel less like obligations and more like opportunities. Only time would tell. But for tonight, Julian allowed himself to rest, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges and new navigation of a role he'd never sought but which was now permanently his. Moreth vas'tin, life-bonded protector, the human who'd blocked death and earned a queen's kneel in his own blood. It was a story they'd tell for generations. He just had to figure out how to live up to it.